We are talking about the physical changes that happen with a newborn. What I did not show you yesterday was the outline for it. I didn't show you the things that we're going to cover in this, and so it's helpful for us to look at that quickly now. So we're talking, and we already started talking about like innate abilities of infants at birth. This means instinctual. Bless you. Right? And we've talked about innate before, the things that happen naturally or are universal. We have three groups of reflexes for infants. Some of those infants continue on as we develop, thanks Hazley, and others disappear if there's normal development. Yeah. It's interesting, there is quite a lag to the video here. We'll see how things go. Julia, as I'm writing stuff down, maybe you can listen to my voice. Or I could just switch over to the other hotspot.
No, it's okay.
Okay, because for example, I underlined 3 like 60 seconds ago and it still hasn't shown up.
It's here.
Oh, is it there? It's just not on my iPad. Okay, sounds good. There are many specific reflexes we're going to talk about, like we talked yesterday about when you run your finger down the bottom of their foot from the heel up towards the sole. Could you get that since you're not in a... And so that stuff is there. We're going to talk about nutrition and how important it is, and we already knew that it has an impact on the development of an infant prior to delivery, but certainly it continues afterwards. Growth is especially accelerates in that first year after birth, so that nutrition is very important. There are some developmental milestones that babies should be able to perform during the certain months, and again, that tells you whether there's normal development. If there is normal development, if your baby's progressing normally. There's different measurements that doctors do in their initial checkups in that first year, so we'll look at that as well. And then there's some different abilities that infants develop. Words that you'll have to know. I think everybody should understand this term universal. You know, universal means it's every human. It's a condition, or it's a trait of every human. It doesn't matter what culture you're born into, what race, what time in history you were born, that these are traits or characteristics or behaviors. So as an example, smiling is a universal response. That's an example. Every culture uses smiling. They use other facial features in different ways, but a smile is universally expressed and universally understood. When someone is pleased, they naturally smile, so universal. What would you say is the definition of innate if you tried to give me one? Because I think you would know this. Innate. An innate ability or an innate behavior.
It's not taught, like it's kind of just there.
Yes, it is it is primal or instinctual. You know, it's there at birth. And the opposite of that is that it is not taught. So we said that there are reflexes that are innate, and so that would be an example of that. These two you should be very familiar with, the idea of synapses and neurons. And Bree's the only person here, and by your facial expression, that was correct. Neurons are you guys recall, because we actually learned about drawing out a neuron. It has, like the dendrites at the front, the cell body, the axon, the myelin sheath, like those types of things. So in a nervous system, you go up the spine and you've got the brain or whatever, if that's the brain and this is the spinal cord. All of the senses that are around the body are brought into the spinal cord and then sent up into that brain, central nervous system. But it is not directly linked. It's not like the message gets, the input is a touch on my wrist, for example, and then that wrist message, sensation message goes consistently up into a part of my brain that I recognize what I'm feeling. the message is sent, becomes chemical, comes in as electric, becomes chemical. It's neuron to neuron to neuron. They're near each other and they transmit that message. It's kind of a complex thing, but cool to imagine. And so Bree, you don't really need to know the details of that for this course. You're all familiar with it. The only thing that you really need to understand and recognize too, though, is that there is a gap. There is no touching between those neurons, and you know that there are those synapses, the gaps. So that's what the synapse is. If I look up neuron and synapse, just as a visual reminder. Are you doing it? Oh, nice. So in some ways, you guys can benefit from that stuff when you have an overlap of something. You should wow her. And so if we're looking at images here, so if this picture will open for us, this is the difference. You have neurons existing in a baby brain, but it has no experience, right? And so we know that, let me go like this. We know that we form those connections between the neurons with and through experience, right? So you've got a weeks-old baby over here, and it has the different neurons, but it doesn't have the connections or those little branches that reach out. You've got a newborn here that has a bit more experience, and the brain is able to receive and process that experience. But then at 3 months old, that's when the brain is really starting to do its work. And you can tell by the branches that are reaching out from one neuron near to another neuron, whereas that's where learning is happening. At 6 months old, just look at the difference in the connections there. And again, they're not physically touching, those branches don't physically touch each other, but they reach out near to other neurons nearby for a more complex web. And then they send that electric message and chemical and out, and that's how more learning can happen, which is why at 2 years old compared to a newborn, you can't potty train at this age, of course, because the connections in the brain just aren't present. That's why you can't form memories prior to 2 months old, because the connections in the brain just aren't present. So there is certainly the development, and that's in the next section that we're going to look at is the cognitive development. But the neuron and synapse connection is still important for us. Reflexes we're talking about, there's 2 types of growth trends. These are growth trends. And like we said, you would take your baby in to see a doctor on a routine basis in your first year. And the doctor is doing measurements specifically to confirm that the baby is developing along those proper trend development rates. We've talked about habituation before, and I think I even mentioned it the other day. We can't hear the projector. We don't think about that anymore. We've learned to block it out. Babies can end up doing that. They can fall asleep in a car. They can fall asleep in loud environments. They can learn to turn that stuff off, but then they can also be startled by a loud noise that brings them back to a focus and stuff like that. So we'll look a little bit at like that. And then we have talked about the difference between gross motor skills and fine motor skills. And an example of a gross motor skill development, one of the first ones is just the head moving or being able to hold up their head, right? And so one of the things for a new infant is that a good parent will know that they have to do something called, it would be infant, have you heard of infant tummy time? It's an important thing for a parent to do is to lay your baby on its stomach, and then it will work to bring its head up, and that helps strengthen the muscle of the neck, and because it's going to need the neck muscles to start the rollover process. It's part of the development, the physical development, but also part of that cognitive development. So tummy time, that being able to hold up their head or steady their head. When you're holding a very newborn baby, you need to really support that head. But if you're holding, say, a 3-month-old baby, you can more support the shoulders because their neck muscles can support the head on their own, kind of thing. So lots of things to consider. you don't really read the manual when you buy a car because you drive a car the way you drive a car. Some people have more information. That's well and good. And you can probably get away with raising an infant, for example, without a lot of information. But the more information you know, the more you're going to be able to create an environment that's nurturing and caring and supporting the development of that infant. And so then you might end up with, a smarter baby, or I don't know. It's important. But consider, like a teen mother, someone who's, like Isaiah's mother from the film, just probably wouldn't have any comprehension or knowledge to look after that stuff. So, yeah, so that's the stuff we're kind of looking at. We talked yesterday, and you wrote some notes here about what reflexes are, and then we can just look at this part here, the 3 sets of reflexes. Julia, do you see it on your screen, the ABC?
Not yet.
Okay, so yeah, it is still lagging. Okay, but it's on your page 1. Oh, there you go. So one of the main reflex jobs for infants is that it protects their oxygen supply. There is a breathing reflex, taking in that first gasp of air is a reflex. Breathing is a reflex. Additional reflexes that maintain oxygen are things like hiccups, sneezing, thrashing to escape something covering their face. And like I said, we had that conversation about SIDS. You could put that. Sudden infant death syndrome. A young boy who was once my student, he and his wife lost their first baby at a pretty young age, and there was just no explanation for it. They both were smokers, and so if you were in a home of smoking, there's a higher rate of that. They say that one of the precautions that parents can take is that you might have a nursery, a room in your home that you set up as your baby's room, but in the initial number of weeks, you might have that baby sleep in, say, a bassinet beside your bed, because just hearing the rhythm of the parents sleeping helps to regulate the breathing of that infant. So just having someone breathing near them is enough to help support the reflex of breathing. So that's interesting there. And we also talked about, like that in the bedding of a crib, has to be flat, not puffy or anything like that. You don't want to, it may look comfy and cozy to lay an infant into some really plush, full kinds of bedding, but it needs to just be flat so that there's nothing that could potentially block their airway. And this one here covering their face, I've seen video of it, like if you just took a baby blanket, how small those swaddling blankets, it's like thin, it's like a tea towel is really what it is, like a thin tea towel. And if you put that over a baby's face, they'll eventually move their arms around until it's removed. And so you might not recognize it as a reflex, but it is. Something else they do is they look after controlling their body temperature. If they're too cold, their body will react. Shivering, they'll bring their legs in close to their body to kind of maintain some of that heat, or they'll cry, things like that. Sometimes they'll even pee, right? If the temperature in a room changes, that can be another response of that. When they're hot, then they'll push away blankets and things like that. If they're too hot, their face might get red. Now, some of this will remain as they grow beyond the infancy stage. If any of you ever give it a try to do infant photography, if some of you are taking photography classes and such, I've done that. It's really kind of interesting. But in your preparation for it, if you look at any of the videos of photographers that do that, their first instructions to parents will be that before I arrive in your home, environment, you need to turn the temperature up. Because as soon as you take a layer off of the clothing and the swaddling blankets, they're cool, and that's when they'll pee down dad's arm or that kind of stuff. So yeah, they've got to maintain that comfort level, and so you've got to raise the temperature in the room. And then managing feeding. And so like we said before, so there's a sucking reflex, that goes away as a child or adult. The rooting reflex we were just talking about, and it's down here, so we'll talk about it down there. But that's if you're just touching the side, the corner of the mouth, that infant's head will turn towards whatever side of the mouth you're triggering, because it's moving towards what it anticipates as a food source. This is instinct, right? To maintain food. Both of these are instinct. Swallowing is a reflex which doesn't go away, right? That's something that we maintain. Or spitting up, these things are reflex actions and they assist with getting nutrition. Okay, now you all joined, or you are all now part of that Moodle course. And so if you're ever interested in your reviewing of this stuff, I've included a link on the Moodle page for this section. And it goes through all of the different types of reflexes for infants. So we're way down here, Unit 3, at physical development. You don't have to log into it now, but it's right here, this one here, neonatal reflexes. So if you're reviewing, for example, and you don't remember what we're talking about, it's there. There's also a video here once this loads. A video specifically that looks at the different types of reflexes by a neonatal nurse. So maybe it'll load and we'll come back to that. Okay, so these are some of the main types of reflexes, and they disappear. So these reflexes, you can write this down. These reflexes, if present, would indicate healthy nervous system development. I think you guys are all familiar that DEV would be development, right? Do I need to write that out? I think we're good. Okay, so healthy nervous system. If they persist, though, if they last beyond infancy, it indicates damage to the nervous system. So with a newborn, you want to see these reflexes, but you'd also want to see them disappear eventually. So we have what's called the Moro reflex, and it's also called AKA the startle reflex. If you go to pick up a sleeping baby, they automatically throw their arms out side to side. It's a startle reflex. Or if they're sleeping there and you do a loud clap or something, there's a loud noise in the room, arms go out. It's a startle reflex. So it's the body language kind of, I don't know, ready as protection or something like that. So our arms fling out to the side. Palms up and thumbs are flexed. So that's very specifically observed, right? But again, it would be universal of all infants. And a good indication. So that's what happens, and then they would relax. Yeah. Startle reflex. Arms fling out to the side fully. Palms have to be up. Thumbs become flexed. Then they'll relax, and everything goes back to its regular, body language here. So it disappears at 3 months. MOS is 3 months. Okay. But what's interesting here is if asymmetrical, then it indicates Nerve injury. Or if it doesn't happen, if you startle them and they don't have that response, then it's a red flag, right? And what I mean by symmetrical, it's supposed to be that both arms go out, and if you startle or have the startle reflex, trigger it, and it, one arm stays in, for example, and the other arm does what it's supposed to, if it's not identical on either side, that's symmetrical. So if it's asymmetrical and one side is slightly underperforming, then it's an indication of nerve injury. Gripping would be another one. So you just touch the palm. And then their fingers grasp. Okay, but here's the thing. When they're gripping, if you pull away, they grip tighter, which not by choice, because they don't have the cognitive ability. It's the reflex, right? And they grip so tight that you can even pull up and their bodies will lift off the table. That's how tight their grip can be in those newborn hands and arms, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh. They do grip hair as well, right? Yeah. Did you have a comment, Julia?
Oh no, I think my cat stepped on something.
Oh, what's that?
Just monitor and let me know.
Okay, we did. I kind of looked, but I didn't know if it was further down, and so I just would feel comfortable.
Yeah,
but you've done the walkabout?
Everywhere, but
sure.
I don't know.
Okay.
You guys are very clean. Thank you.
Okay, toe curling. So if you touch the bottom of their foot, and it has to be from heel up to sole, the ball of your foot. Their response should be that they hyperflex their toes. Yep. Like I'll put here, they fan out. And the big toe curls up, not in. And this should end. It ends by 6 to 9 months with normal development here. But this reflex in a child or adults is bad. It indicates a nerve or brain injury. So I've seen it a lot in, for example, like ER shows. Somebody comes in with a head trauma or potential spinal trauma, and one of the first things that the people in the ER will do is they take that flat tool. It's that little thin stick, like a popsicle stick, and they run it from the bottom up, and everybody watches, and if the toe goes and the toes flex, then everyone kind of goes, oh, okay, this is really serious, right? And it helps them kind of diagnose more quickly what it could be. That is called the Babinski reflex for adults there. So bad if you have it as an adult. There's also the sucking reflex, which we said. So anything that touches the roof of their mouth triggers the sucking reflex. So there's an indication that this is a reflex. For example, if you have an infant that has cleft palate, so no roof of their mouth, they still will root. If you trigger the side of their mouth, they'll still move towards whatever it is. They'll attempt to suck, but there's no ability to suck because the roof is open, right? Inside? It's just completely, if you think about it, the roof of your mouth is, soft tissue between the bottom of your nose and your mouth. It's what, you can, this is kind of gross, but you can sniff and clear out your nose and that snot goes down the back of your throat, right? Where you can take in water through your nose as well, and it still goes down what goes down through your throat. So they both lead to the same hole. You can cough and choke on something and milk comes out your nose. They're both connected. It's uncomfortable. Don't laugh. So that just means that soft tissue there didn't form through and connect. So that means that you could take your tongue and, but nobody as an adult that could control or child even that could control their tongue could probably touch, stick it out their nostril because it would be corrected. But technically,
imagine being like, hey, look at this.
Yeah. Just wait, that'll be the new, like, there are people that destroy their body on purpose.
Yeah.
So that could be the next, trend. Hey, I had part of my palate removed.
Instead of having your tongue.
Splitting
Yeah.
their tongue in half and then
Yeah, let's not. Don't give anyone ideas. Your future children might be listening, so. Okay, this goes away. And when I say goes away, I mean it is inhibited. It's the brain development that makes it recede as a reflex in the body, so it goes away, and it should go away between 3 to 4 months, because by that age they're a bit more cognitively aware and they can do their own sucking or choose when to suck or not suck, that kind of stuff. Rooting is the next one, and we've already talked about that. If I can scroll up a little bit here. So if you stimulate the cheek, if you stimulate the side of their mouth, so stimulate or stroke gently, don't be rough with your babies, but stimulate or stroke the side of their mouth or lips. Their head will turn towards that side. And again, it's a reflex because it's looking for a nipple. All of these things reflect, as a reflex or instinctual, we could think are part of a survival, evolutionary kind of leftover habits, right? From our connection to the apes or whatever you believe in. And this here should go away again, goes away in 3 to 4 months. The reflex here is to seek out food. Just so we're clear on the purpose of that, it's one of those feeding reflexes. The stepping reflex is interesting because if you hold a baby over a hard surface and their foot settles on it, they'll lift a leg up and ahead as if to step. So there's a reflex to walk, to step forward. 2, simulate walking. This is inhibited by 2 months. So that's one that's really interesting. It serves no function. There's no, that doesn't protect or give the baby anything, because in order for that reflex to show up, it needs to be held up by somebody. It doesn't support their breathing, it doesn't support their temperature, it doesn't support their digestion. So it's just interesting that it is still kind of a leftover part of that evolutionary early ability, if you think of it like that, if you have that mindset, that goes away so quickly. It's just interesting. So then there is another pose called fencing. And so the head will face away. With an arm and leg stretched out on one side. And on the other side, warm this up, the arm and leg bend. It mimics the pose of a fencer. Right? Arm out, the other one, sword out, the other one up, like this kind of thing. So this is really kind of cool. This lasts a bit longer. It lasts until 8 to 9 months. What would you guess is the potential purpose of this reflex? Defense. Yeah, it's a defensive, protective pose, although the infant isn't knowingly doing it, and it really serves no protection against whatever might be there, right? So it is instinctual or innate, part of that reflex. What is interesting here, though, that the fencing pose is, this pose can be displayed by people who have a hard hit in hockey, for example. Just think if you've ever seen this, where somebody gets a real hard hit on the arena, on the ice, his head knocks back and is hit hard. And I've seen it. I could look up a video. It might take me a little bit to find it, but they are kind of passed out and unconscious for a second, and their one arm is up and the other one's kind of here. It's really kind of creepy to imagine. And again, protective. So it happens, this still happens in adults. With a concussion, for example. I wonder if I could really quickly find it, because that Andrew East passed out in the weight room, and I'll see if I can find the video. Okay, I can play it for you guys. Want to kind of come? Well, maybe just wait. Let me see if I can look it up. Okay, well, you guys are watching this. It's very short. Can you see that, Julia? He's going to pass out right here. His head thrown to the side, and he leaves the arm is out, and then the other arm that stayed up a little bit, and then the knees relax. It's really strange. His head just flings to the side, It's because he lifted too heavy of a weight after getting up and didn't have enough. Did you see the head flip? And then he hit it. Yeah. Or if I'm looking, I could also Google and look for, like he was in the hospital and this was just, like I don't know if it was even a week after they had had that baby, and his wife was not happy. She's quite concerned about that. They have video cameras all throughout their house for security reasons, I think, but hockey player fencing pose or boxing.
If they can get him fit and playing well, suddenly looks impressive. Oh, Lewis has not moved. Wonderful courage from both players. It was a terrible pass. It put him in danger. Spills wide Higgins. Opportunity.
That's just great courage. The ball's there. Harbour has to make an attempt to mark the ball. He's out before he hits the ground there, Lewis.
I said the other night, it's a primitive game sometimes. Not many sports in the world where you see that sort of courage. In fact, I can't think of a one.
There's not one, Dennis. No. In fact, even I know you.
So that's good example, good enough evidence to say that some of these reflexes do continue for us as adults, right? Okay. Here's another thing that also connects to this kind of evolutionary like leftover, I guess we could call it. That babies more prefer to look at beautiful faces than ugly ones. Does that seem strange? What is the scientific definition of a beautiful face? Anybody? Symmetrical. Yeah. And actually, symmetrical specifically, there's one side of the face that is more important, that there is a certain symmetry or organization of the features of your face, like the space from your nose bridge of your eye and where your mouth is and that kind of stuff. Which side do you think is more important? It is the right side, because the people that look at you read from left to right, meaning that they're focusing on your right first. Yeah, and so they've done that, and I guess for all of these things, you can anticipate, how they would do it, and it is if they put these images in front of an infant and it's the one that it's willing to look at or leave looking at something else to look at it, or it will maintain its looking at it for longer rather than losing interest. It's those types of indications. What type of research is that? Is it experimental? What is it? Lexi with her clean clothes?
Clean hair.
Oh, it's clean hair. What is it? You're observing babies. Observational, yeah. So we're reading information simply by their behaviors, but we're able to get information from it as well. So researchers have confirmed infants prefer faces over just random abstract shapes, which would be, if there's a picture that you put in front of them that has, like a square, a triangle, circles, they'd rather look at faces. So something like this that would be a face to them, rather than just shapes itself. They like complex things to look at rather than simple ones. And they like curves. Curved patterns over faces that have mixed up patterns. So this all speaks to that evolutionary kind of perspective, where there's a recognition of it being more important to them, right? Even preferring this A over all the rest of these kind of tells you, because an infant, this is that, if you guys recall back to when we were learning about birds and what genes can pass on to different types of birds. If you have a bird in captivity, you're not showing them how to nest or create a nest. You're not teaching them. They haven't observed another bird nest. But if you raise that bird, it instinctually creates one of 3 types of nests. Do you recall that conversation? They'll either try to make a nest on the side of a cliff, like some birds naturally, instinctually do. They'll try to make a nest in trees, or they'll try to make a nest on the ground. That's instinct. That's part of DNA. This should be really telling to you that babies who haven't been taught that this shape and the features or organization of these shapes in front of them are more important than the other 3. That speaks to something instinctual, part of the DNA, right? And so it's quite interesting. Can I get you to, yeah, sure. Even in the early months of life, babies can discriminate, among the facial features, then they prefer attractive faces to less attractive ones. If you're looking for a research topic for your inquiry project, any of these topics would work. Newborns will look at pictures of their parents over looking at pictures of strangers. And again, if you go back to what a newborn's brain looked like, it's pretty impressive and instinctual again, right? As early as 3 months, babies can tell when a caregiver shifts their attention to something else. So if a caregiver is holding a 3-month-old baby, and instead of looking at the baby, the caregiver looks over here, that baby can recognize that it doesn't have the attention of the caregiver, and the baby eyes will look to wherever the caretaker is looking. So they recognize, it's called awareness of focus. So by 3 months already, an infant recognizes what you're paying attention to, what you're looking at. And they'll shift their own attention to the same object. So there's all that kind of evidence and research that proves the point that newborns in their very beginning of life innately, so by instinct, instinctually have the ability to experience, to respond to, and to learn from their environment. The sensory system of newborns are very well formed, but they are still developing. And you can think of a newborn nervous system, or neurons. I guess we could write down neurons versus a 2-year-old is very underdeveloped, but they still have some of those very clear abilities, like perfect pitch we mentioned, right? So I actually have a video here that I want to show you. Their development is primarily shaped by experience, and then that alters the brain connection permanently. Some abilities at birth are eventually lost, and we've talked about that, like perfect pitch, because it's maybe part of that evolutionary, what's passed down but then found not to be necessary. And I'm going to show you here that this is an experiment of perception, or I'm going to use the word differentiation, but I'm not sure that you'll know what that means, of lemurs. So lemurs are a type of primate. They have kind of distinct colors and spots and things like that. What's that? King Julian from, what's that from? Madagascar. There you go. Okay. You could have 20 of them in front of you and maybe not be able to distinguish which one is which, because the features of them are pretty consistent. But they've done this experiment with newborns, and newborns are able to tell the difference between if a new lemur is placed in front of them versus a repeated lemur. Adults don't have this ability or skill. So it's 10:56. This will probably be the last thing that I can share and play here. Julie, I'm going to show you where it is because you could watch it yourself. It'll probably be more easier for you to see. It's on the Moodle course under the 3.4 physical development. There are a bunch of things here, like this is the visual perception and as it advances for a newborn. you know. They see things more clearly, what's closer to them, then eventually they are able to see the new and the far, and then they see it more distinctly and in vibrant colors, that kind of stuff there. But here, this one here, Julia, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to watch that on your own? Or you can just pause us here, and I'm going to play it. It'll be in the recording. Then what follows immediately after this, if you join us back, I'll open it up in that ELA course, because then there's the survey to do. I can get a friend of yours to pick your survey slip and send you the photo so you know I didn't pick it. Okay, so here is the baby synapse.
Like all babies, little Grace here can look at the faces of primates, like these lemurs, and actually tell one from another. But what's interesting is that her older sister can't. To her, all these lemurs look the same. So how are you doing? Well, let's make it easier for you. Can you tell them apart now? No? Well, you're not alone. Because it turns out that even people who've spent a lifetime studying primates like these lemurs can't tell their faces apart. But just like little Grace, there was a time in our lives when all of us could. And scientists at Sheffield University have proved it. They showed primate faces to two sets of babies. One group under 6 months, the other over 9 months. To start with, all the babies looked at the faces and their attention was held. But when the researchers tried again with a different face, the results were astonishing. The older babies refused to look at the new face. They were bored. They thought they'd seen it before. Clearly, they couldn't see the difference in the two faces. But when the younger babies were shown the new face, it was a different story. They were fascinated. That's because they could see that this was a different lemur.
I'm just going to pause for a second here. You see this, the top of her shirt, her onesie? You see how it's got those, this kind of collar and then it overlaps like that? I'd never really paid attention to that, and then I saw it in a video here just maybe even yesterday. It's like that on purpose so that parents can get them over their shoulders. They don't go over their head like normal people. So you could make a shirt, Aisley, that has that type of sleeve that can go down instead of up, if you think about it. Isn't that weird? I never thought about that before.
But in order to get on in a world of humans, all babies have to lose this extraordinary skill. So what happens to make a baby's brain more like their parents? The answer to this tells us a lot about the way our brain develops its ability to communicate with other people. A baby's brain is a little bit like this tray of cress, with all the seeds representing individual connections or synapses, all doing different jobs. From the moment they're born, the number of connections flourishes, leaving babies with 1.5 times as many synapses as an adult. This gives them skills they will simply never need, like recognizing the difference in primate faces. Our brain now has too many synapses. It needs to specialize. Which connections live and die depends on who we look at. Human babies grow up looking almost entirely at human faces. So the connections that process these continue to survive and grow. What babies don't use, they lose.